Hi, welcome to the Education Policy Equation. I'm your host, Jack Murdoch. My guest today is Beth Lewis, a K-12 policy expert and director of Save Our Schools Arizona. Beth is probably one of the most important figures in education policy in Arizona, and it's a real honor to have her on the podcast today. Thanks so much for being here today, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me, Jack.
So we're here today to talk about Arizona's ESA program. And as I was planning this conversation, it's difficult because it's a very, very complicated issue, and it's tough to narrow down what we want to talk about. Before we actually talk about the program itself, I think it would be interesting if you could tell me your take on what is driving this move towards ESA type programs. We've got an Arizona ESA program, but this seems to be a really widespread movement. I think we've got something like 11 other states now that have implemented similar programs. Um, the reason I find that interesting is because voucher theory has been around for decades, so it's not a new idea. Milton Friedman wrote about this in the 60s, but it seems like all of a sudden there's this huge push towards ESAs, and I'd love to get your opinion on what's driving that.
Yeah, thank you so much. You're right. Arizona is sort of the tip of the spear when it comes to privatization of schools and voucher programs, but we're seeing movement across the country. It is mostly being driven by special interests, many of whom have, a lot of money. They have very deep pockets, and there are groups that are really focused on using vouchers as a moneymaker, right? More profit-driven models. And then there are groups that are more focused on using vouchers to really expand religious education and religion in general. And there are also groups that really don't believe in public education or necessarily publicly funded institutions at all. And so all three of those different movements have sort of joined forces to say, we may not have the same ends, but our vehicle is a voucher. And so let's work together to push these across the states. So anybody fighting against vouchers and fighting just for regular local public schools in our neighborhoods has really found ourselves up against the Goliath in this situation.
It does seem to be a really politically powerful movement, no doubt. The evidence for that is obviously their success in implementing this legislation in a number of states. So I think now we'll actually delve into the program itself. You did a I watched your debate with Matt Weinberg, in which I thought you laid out a pretty compelling case against the ESA program. I'm someone who's kind of hasn't taken a side yet. Uh, I have sympathies towards ESA type programs. I'm a Milton Friedman guy. I sort of have a sympathy more towards a targeted voucher program. I'm sort of haven't picked a side yet on whether I think this universal ESA program is a great deal or not. So that's sort of my background. I haven't picked a side yet, but I think the the most severe indictment of the ESA program is the charge that it will be bad for Arizona's budget. Tell us a little bit about why you think that the ESA program will be bad for the Arizona budget.
Yeah, so first off, it's important to note that Arizona's budget is rather small per capita. We're one of the lowest budgets in the entire country. So we're not revenue rich here. We really have to watch every single nickel and dime. With the voucher program, well over half of the students were already attending private school and homeschool. And so that means that not only were their parents already able to afford that expense, which is an expense, I understand that, but the state had no money allocated towards those students. So now when those families decide to take a voucher for each of those students, it's a direct and new cost to the state. Unfortunately, our legislature and our legislative budget committee did not adequately project those costs. And so, they said the very first year would cost $33 million. It ended up costing over $500 million. And now we're in the second year of universal voucher expansion. They thought that it would cost around $65 million. Instead, the price tag is well over $600 million. So they were like 10 times off their mark. And with that, the legislature has not adequately budgeted for the program. We also have a lot of very wealthy families using the program, and they tend to be located in wealthy areas like Scottsdale and Paradise Valley. And in those locations, because property taxes are higher, the state doesn't actually pitch in for those kids. So it's sort of a double ding because those are called non-state aid districts. So all of those kids in those areas are also an entirely new cost to the state, even if they're switching. So I think that the state really failed to look at the economies here to consider how many students were already in private school and homeschool, about 100,000 kids, to really consider how many of those families were going to take a free, no strings attached coupon from the government, right? Human nature predicts that many would. And so we're stuck in this situation where not only are our public schools funded at 48th in the nation, and really, really struggling. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I've been in the classroom for the last 12 years. I'm a parent, I'm a PTO president. I can tell you we are really struggling. And now we're giving hundreds of millions of dollars away to folks who didn't even necessarily need this and didn't actually make a new school choice at all. So when folks try to say that this is about school choice and the money follows the child, that's just not true.
Yeah, it does seem to complicate the theory a lot more when we've got, as you said, parents who are probably already attending private schools that were able to afford it. Now they're using state funds to subsidize an education they were already able to get. There's some inefficiency there in terms of just economic welfare effects. And I take the budgetary concern very seriously. To me, I think that's paramount. Is this really bad for our budget? I'd like to get your reaction though to a month or so ago, I spoke with Katie Ratliff of the Common Sense Institute, and their projections, when they took a look at it, their argument is that the JLBC has consistently been way overestimating public school enrollment, and that's generated savings in the general fund that will then be able to be used to cover the increasing costs of the students who are now all the students who are coming into this ESA program. And so their argument is that the savings from decreasing public school enrollment and overestimation by the JLBC will cover this ESA program. What's your reaction to their report?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing these sort of fabricated reports that aren't grounded in economic reality come out of think tanks that, are really well funded and they sound good. But when you actually do the math and you look at the numbers and you think, okay, so over 50% of these families are an entirely new cost. The other 50%, even if they're switching from a district or a charter, are not actually saving the state money. With a charter switcher, you might argue that they save $100. That does not impact a school. It does not help save costs. With a a district student, their voucher is actually worth $500 more than district students receive. So, these think tanks are trying to push a narrative with fake numbers. And it's very frustrating because, every projection we've made has been on the nose. We said it's not going to be $33 million the first year, it's going to be $500 million. We were exactly right. And we said the next year, you're going to be looking at closer to $1 billion. And all of the numbers are on track to show that. We also are seeing a stagnation of district and charter enrollment, which means that there is not an exodus from public schools. We are awaiting data from the Department of Education, which should be released this month, that will give us a better indication. But, I will tell you from looking at the budgets of districts across the state, we are not seeing any sort of huge dips in enrollment that would in any way factor into cost savings for the state. I also think it's really important to talk about the way that schools are budgeted. This is never part of the conversation, but it has to be, right? We are talking about families that are using a voucher to fund things like a $4,000 piano in their living room. Instead of, and families are then justifying that and saying, well, I saw a piano at a local high school, so it's educational, so we should get to have that. The local high school, when they spend $4,000 on a piano, first, that's a huge expenditure for a district. That is massive. It can serve hundreds of students every single year for decades if it's a quality piano like that. That is very different than putting a piano in every single child's living room across the state. We also need to look at the economy within a school. If 5 kids leave their local elementary school, it's not going to make a difference in terms of how much air conditioning is needed or how many principals and psychologists and counselors, right, and specials teachers are needed. There's no difference there. There's no savings to the school. But that's enough money that you're going to have to cut an entire teacher. So if you have 90 kids in the 3rd grade and you have 3 classrooms, you have to cut a 3rd grade teacher. You now have 45 kids in each class instead of 30 kids. And I'm a teacher in Arizona. I've been through those cuts. I know the difference between having 25 kids in your class versus 42 kids in your class. I have lived that reality, and it is so unjustifiable to be giving coupons to the wealthy to offset their choice, their, private education, when that has a direct economic impact on 1 million kids across the state who are in public schools.
Gotcha. Yeah, so there are a couple things there. I'm unfortunately, I don't know the budget. I don't understand how the Arizona budget works. I've tried a couple times. I've got a background in economics, but I still don't. I think that's more of a policy realm that I haven't done the requisite work to understand. So I can't defend Katie Ratliff well here. Not saying that your arguments against her are incorrect. I'm not able to give her a good defense here. I think you make a really good point about the fixed costs of public schools. The way they've been built is very high fixed costs, and any subtraction of funds from that will come at a very, very high cost. I guess now I'd like to move on to some of the arguments that I think are the best arguments. They're really arguments behind the voucher program in general. We can generalize them to the ESA program. That's similar enough. As a free market guy, one of the things about vouchers that appeals to me is this idea that it's going to create sort of market-based competition in which suppliers of education, the schools, will have better incentives to uh, improve the education they deliver to the consumers, to be the parents. That sort of makes sense to me. Tell me what your reaction to that line of reasoning is.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about the free market, when you talk about competition, we're often talking about things like where you get your coffee or what your favorite shoe brand is. But when you're talking about education, you're talking about children, you're talking about their futures, it is very different. When you talk about competition, there are inherently winners and losers. And I think when you apply a free market, model to education, you will inherently have winners and losers. And I, as an educator, do not think that that's acceptable. I also think that within the free market system, there are regulations that do, we can argue all day about the level of regulation of the free market, and how that, should be applied. But I think when you're talking about children, you should have regulations that make sure that children are safe, make sure that they're at least learning a certain level of standard, right? Make sure that there's some sort of accountability for the school. And the way that Arizona's universal voucher program was written, there's none of that. We don't know if kids, when they're in front of tutors and vendors and teachers, there's no fingerprinting. We don't know if that same person had their teacher's license revoked at the local district for improper behavior with a minor and then went straight into the ESA program. There's nothing prohibiting that. We also don't have any regulations about what is taught. And, again, that is a continuum. I'm not going to sit here and say that we need to regulate everything that's taught. Obviously, in the public schools, there's wiggle room, but there need to be standards. We need to make sure that kids are getting an education. So, I think that applying the free market model sort of presupposes also that the consumer would have an immediate feedback loop about success. And that's just not the case with education. Like, I can tell that my Nikes are falling apart. I can tell that the Starbucks coffee tastes bitter. I can make those choices pretty instantly as a consumer. With education, oftentimes parents don't find out that their kids are behind in a subpar school until it is far too late. At which time, frequently, parents take the kids back to the local public school. Public school, of course, accepts that child because that's what public schools do, and works to meet the needs to catch that child up. And that is another huge burden on the system. So if you want to talk about a free market system, you need to have parity across the models. You need to have a leveling of, regulation, and you need to have some way that the consumer, the parent, can compare apples to apples. And we don't have any of that in Arizona with this voucher program.
I think that's a fair point. Another argument, and this is sort of, I think, one of the most popular ones, is just that an ESA program will increase choice, which it certainly will increase choice. Um, Tell me what your reaction is to someone who says we need the ESA program because it's going to increase choice, increase diversity of what schools you can choose. Parents are going to be able to uh, find schools that cater to specific needs that their children have. I mean, on the surface, that seems like a very appealing argument to me. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, I think the thing with choice is we have to ask who is doing the choosing, right? And what are the quality of choices? So with Arizona's ESA expansion, we've seen that schools are typically the ones that are doing the choosing, right? I might choose to have a voucher. I, as a parent, might consider that to be more choice. But then if I go to 7 schools and apply for my son to be accepted to that school, and I'm denied by every single school, is that really a choice? Right? If my child is on an IEP and I can't find a school that will meet his needs, is that really a choice? So I think choice sounds really, really great. And of course, we as humans, we love to have free will. We love to have choices. But who's doing the choosing? And what are the quality of choices? Like if I'm in a rural area and I have this unfettered choice, I can drive 3 hours to, a really expensive, amazing Catholic school, but then I'd have to drive 3 hours and I wouldn't be able to have a job. Or I can send my kid to a strip mall school that just popped up that has 3 kids and a teacher that doesn't know what they're doing. Right. So sometimes there's an illusion of choice that is really propped up as a great talking point, but when it plays out in reality, doesn't provide that many choices while also diluting the local neighborhood choice that is accessible and free to all and has standards of quality and safety, which is your local public school. And if we are pouring all of our money and our resources into these private school options and really diluting the entire ecosystem of education, I think we are going to see shutdowns of local schools. We're going to see consolidations. We're going to see schools have to go to 4-day weeks, which is a 20% cut to their education. We're going to see bus options being cut, so access is being cut. And so what we're losing is the ability for every Arizona family to choose their local public school. And if that's not a choice, then the people who are going to lose out are typically the people who don't have a car, have multiple jobs, don't have the internet, may or may not be able to speak English or navigate the system. Those are our low-income families, families of color, and those are the ones who are going to not benefit from this program, even though it was sold on the backs of those families.
Absolutely. I think you make a really interesting point talking about the fact that the private schools in the ESA program are able to be selective. The economic theory behind voucher programs gets more and more complicated because the system design is really important. And I think that the fact that private schools can select what students to admit complicates the ESA program a whole lot more, as opposed to a movement that I've been a big supporter of, the charter movement. I'm very unequivocally pro-charter. Charter schools are not allowed to be selective. And so I think that, as you're right, that complicates this system a whole lot more. And it also raises a whole lot of questions, as you said, about how this benefits the disadvantaged students, because that's what the spirit behind the voucher program is we want to give the students who are most disadvantaged a shot at a great education. And if that is not happening, that would be a serious indictment of whatever voucher program is being sold. I guess that's where I'd like to move. You may have already answered this, but I'd like to get your reaction to what I think is the one of the best arguments for vouchers is that it will help disadvantaged students who could not otherwise get a great education, get the same level of education that kids who are wealthier are getting in private schools.
Yeah, so in some states we've seen really targeted programs where the only people who are eligible for the voucher would be families who are not well off, right? Families that truly could not afford that program. I think that is a better system. But even in those systems, we see a lot of cherry picking, right? It's okay, well, we want to take this student, but not this student. Here in Arizona, anybody can get the voucher. And so, folks who are extremely well off tend to have higher test scores. They tend to have, more words when they enter kindergarten. They tend to have more family support. They tend to have, more internet access. And so a lot of times the children who are being selected for these choice programs at local private schools are the elite. And so I do really worry that we're setting up this two-tiered system where there are private school options for the elite chosen ones. And then, what happens to district and charter schools? Do they become, only relegated to our low income students or disadvantaged students or students who, don't necessarily have as much at home? This has already sort of happened, just by, but the $7,000 coupon is not going to make a big enough difference here, because what we're seeing is cheap, low quality schools popping up that happen to cost exactly the voucher amount, $7,000. They don't have to prove that kids are learning or what they're doing with students. And the elite private schools are now charging more. A lot of them are charging $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 in Arizona. That $7,000 coupon isn't going to be enough to make up the difference for low income families. It's just not, especially if you have more than one kid. And so, obviously it's hard to access those schools. They tend to be concentrated in wealthier areas of town that can be, half an hour, 45 minutes away from a family that's trying to access that school. So, I know that it was sold as something to help low-income students, but I do feel that that was a ruse. I feel like that was intentionally, it was a lie. To be perfectly blunt, the people who are pushing this had no intention of catering it to low-income students. And, there were efforts, there were efforts in the legislature last year when they universally expanded this to target the program to low-income students. And the lawmakers said, absolutely not. Our constituents are wealthy and they want this program. And, here we are with public school students going without, with PTOs fundraising for tissues and markers. And we've got wealthy people who now have used a $7,000 coupon and now have $7,000 more expendable income to spend on, a vacation or a luxury vehicle while the rest of us go without. So I'm very concerned about the two-tier system that is set up by the universal voucher.
Yeah, and on that note, I'd point out that in the example you used, the family, the very wealthy family that's got the $7,000 coupon. Now they're paying $7,000 more because they were willing to pay $7,000 on top of that, if, as you said, the private school is topping off. That is a big issue with sort of really broad voucher type programs that don't restrict schools from topping off. You get huge amounts of economic deadweight loss. It's inefficient. It's money that's thrown away by the government, and the extent to which that is occurring is a really big indictment of any voucher type program. I think those are very real concerns, especially given how broad this program is. I'll close off just by, and I'll let you go. Arizona's program is special in that, or sort of revolutionary in how universal it was. Anyone can get a voucher. So there's debates over how much Milton Friedman was a supporter of universal vouchers and how much he was a supporter of targeted voucher programs. I'm unsure about the universal ESA program, but it seems reasonable to me that a targeted voucher program could be a really great thing. What are your thoughts about targeted vouchers with certain restrictions on where the money can be spent, and um, also on schools, restrictions on schools topping off who receive voucher funds.
Yeah, so we've always supported the original voucher program since 2016. So it was targeted to students with special needs, students in foster care, students leaving DNF rated schools, right? All of those programs, I think are things that are here to stay and things that should be supported, particularly given the fact that Arizona's schools are so underfunded and the most vulnerable students do get hit the worst in an underfunded situation. However, I also am a firm believer that if we were to adequately fund our schools and to fully resource our schools, the voucher program wouldn't be necessary. I think we're very far away from that in Arizona. We're facing a $400 million deficit this year. We are so far away from fully funding our schools. So in the meantime, I do understand why particularly families with students with special needs are going outside the box and finding ways to meet their students' needs. I get it. I completely understand. I think that Arizona voters are going to demand a pullback of this. Like you said, it was revolutionary. Sometimes revolutionary ideas don't pan out, right? The reality when the rubber meets the road is toxic and something that creates a huge backlash. And I think there will be a course correction, and that voters are going to demand accountability. They're going to demand proper fiscal stewardship of the program. And I think we're going to have to get our budget balanced and rein in this program so that it's not just a coupon for the wealthy, so that the schools are quality and safe. And, I think part of that happens within the free market, but a lot of that has to happen within some government correction, specifically when this is a government program that really overreached, in terms of economy and also child safety. So my prediction is that there will be massive changes around the program over the next few years. But I don't think that we will ever, be completely walking away from a voucher system in Arizona.
Gotcha. Yeah, that seems it's certainly going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. I think I'll certainly be watching closely, and we'll be covering a lot of it on this podcast. Beth, how can we find out more about Save Our Schools, and what are you guys up to right now?
Yeah, so we have a website, sosarizona.org. We're also on Twitter under Arizona SOS. You can find us on all of the other platforms. We've even got a TikTok, which is really great. And we are gearing up for legislative session. We're working with lawmakers to find solutions in this area and a few other areas. We are around the state holding community town halls and rural action summits and just talking to voters, talking to parents and teachers and community members about the importance of public education, and just widening our huge network of volunteers. So it's an exciting time, and I think next year is going to be a really important year with local elections and school board elections, and we're here to fight for the future of our public schools in Arizona.
Beth, thank you so much for being on the program today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jack, and hope to connect soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.